The biopharmaceutical industry operates within a fundamentally high-risk environment, one that is entirely defined by extreme capital burn. This funnel visualization illustrates the severe quantitative parameters of the Valley of Death. For every 8,000 raw compounds that enter preclinical testing, attrition ensures only one single approved unit will reach the market. Data from the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development calculates the average full lifecycle cost per drug at $2.87 billion. Mapping the timeline across this process reveals the temporal friction involved. Navigating the FDA's mandatory 4-phase approval process requires 8 to 12 years of continuous expenditure before generating revenue. Biopharmaceutical development is a fragile mechanical system. Because capital is burned over a fixed, decade-long duration, external shocks to funding prove fatal to most clinical ventures. In 2002, Dr. John Gentry founded Enhanced Therapeutics to navigate this gauntlet. The firm's core intellectual property rested on a patented technique known as retrometabolic drug design technology, a method of modifying existing molecules to target specific therapeutic sites. Gentry's team utilized this technique to develop neuroprosyn. This compound was engineered to safely treat gastrointestinal disorders while eliminating the side effects associated with older therapies. By 2011, Enhanced Therapeutics pushed neuroprosyn to the edge of the regulatory bottleneck. After proving safety and efficacy in Phase 1 and 2 clinical trials, the FDA authorized the compound to advance into Phase 3 testing. Surviving late-stage capital collapse requires an executive team to treat ethical frameworks and leadership styles as interchangeable mechanical tools. Success within this regulatory structure demands operational and moral flexibility to keep the asset viable during a crisis. In early 2011, Enhanced Therapeutics possessed total structural stability. Their Phase 3 trials were financed through a collaboration agreement with Procter & Gamble. 11 months later, Procter & Gamble suddenly announced a major corporate exit from the drug development market, permanently terminating the narrow prison agreement. As Procter & Gamble withdrew, Enhanced Therapeutics' operating cash collapsed, facing an imminent fixed quarterly loan payment of $2.3 million. To prevent cash reserves from hitting zero, Gentry executed a structural response, laying off 57 of his 73 employees. From an organizational perspective, this decision maps to McGregor's Theory X. Gentry deployed an autocratic leadership style, necessitated by critical time constraints of impending insolvency. Ethically, this layoff operated under utilitarianism and free market ethics, prioritizing the survival of the entity over individual job security. Severing the majority of the workforce was a calculated utilitarian necessity. Without that action, the core asset would dissolve, destroying all remaining shareholder value. By March 2012, the regulatory parameters shifted. The FDA issued a hard deadline of November 30th to deliver its final ruling on neuroprosyn. This created tension between the calendar and balance sheet. The firm held exactly $180,000 in cash against millions in scheduled liabilities due before November. The team engineered a pivot, restructuring debt and securing a new bridge loan, injecting $3 million into cash reserves by September. But constraints were rigid. The notes carried default triggers. Facing insolvency before the FDA ruling allowed investors to force immediate bankruptcy. Gentry navigated this phase by shifting from an autocratic model to visionary and pace-setting leadership, aligning institutional investors toward a risky future. Closing the capital gap required an outward-facing strategy that converted future regulatory optimism into present-day liquidity. On December 2, 2012, 2 days past the anticipated deadline, the FDA informed Enhanced Therapeutics it would delay its ruling until the first quarter of 2013. The legal reality was grim, cash was exhausted, and this timeline extension guaranteed the firm would trip the bridge loan's automatic default provisions, triggering bankruptcy. Gentry executed an internal pivot, presenting the inescapable insolvency directly to the staff with complete transparency. Looking at this conceptual organizational chart, we see the staff's proposed solution. The employees agreed to formal termination to halt payroll obligations. In return, they volunteered to remain engaged as unpaid consultants to shepherd the final FDA interactions. Correspondingly, CEO John Gentry, the Chief Financial Officer, and the Chief Scientific Officer all agreed to unconditionally defer their own executive compensation. This collective sacrifice reached the firm's creditors. Witnessing the internal commitment, they actively chose forbearance, ignoring the triggered default provisions. Gentry pivoted to servant and democratic leadership, surrendering institutional control and allowing the firm's survival to rest on group consensus. Ethically, this non-contractual mechanism functioned as an application of the ethic of care and virtue ethics, leaning on human relationships rather than legal mandates. When financial leverage and legal obligations evaporated, the continuation of clinical trials was sustained by interpersonal networks and a shared moral commitment to patients. As the timeline advanced into March 2013, a new consortium of investors offered Enhanced Therapeutics conditional funding, contingent on the FDA's final decision. 10 days later, the FDA approved narapricin for manufacturing and distribution in the United States. That regulatory approval triggered the conditional funding. Institutional capital flowed back into the firm's accounts, clearing immediate debt thresholds and resolving the bridge loan crisis. Following the ruling, Gentry extended formal employment offers, bringing all 16 unpaid consulting staff back onto the official payroll. Enhanced Therapeutics achieved the milestone of FDA approval while functioning as a literal shell, possessing no formal employees and zero capital, proving that corporate resilience can exist independently of balance sheets. Plotting the executive responses to this crisis tracks utilitarianism to the ethic of care on the x-axis and autocratic to servant control on the y-axis. The first major crisis node, the restructuring of the workforce, maps to the bottom left. It was an autocratic and utilitarian decision. The second node, negotiating the restrictive bridge loan, moves toward the center, requiring a visionary approach to align investor expectations. The final node, transitioning the staff to unpaid consultants, maps to the top right. It relied on servant leadership and the ethic of care. The firm survived because it switched ethical models as the environment changed. In the highly constrained physics of corporate crisis, moral and ethical flexibility functions as an executive's most critical structural tool.